Let's welcome now to the program Mike Lange's longtime broadcast partner and another significant voice in Pittsburgh hockey. He is Paul Steigerwald. Staggy, it's a sad day. Mike so electrified Penguins hockey for so many years.
He was absolutely spectacular at his job in his career. He did so much to help hockey, to help the Penguins, to make our lives more fun in the wintertime. He was really fun to work with. He was a character, hilarious guy. We wanted to be funny. He could be really funny. He was extremely dedicated to doing the best job he could possibly do, and he was connected to the people of Western Pennsylvania like no other. And I really enjoyed working with him, and I know that people probably felt really bad over the last couple of years to see his health declining as it did, and it's just too bad. We wish he could live forever, because he certainly will live forever in everybody's hearts.
Staggy, what made Mike special as an announcer and play-by-play man? How did he make that connection, and what about his skills? Because I thought he painted such a picture, especially on radio.
Well, I think the big thing was that he understood, first of all, how to use his voice. He had a fantastic instrument, and I think it was a perfect voice for hockey. There's a bass resonance to it, but there's also this sharpness to it, like a treble sound that cut through. And he used it very judiciously. He didn't scream. Later in his career, he tended to bring it a little bit louder than he did when he was younger. Because I don't think he had the same resonance maybe as he got older. But in his heyday, if you listen to him, I can remember, Mark, listening to him coming from the West Coast, like he'd be in Calgary or somewhere like that, and I'd be in my car like on a Friday night, and I was working with the Penguins, but I wasn't traveling, and so I'd make sure I tuned him in, and he would be quiet almost as he called the game. It was almost like he knew you had the phone or you had your radio like under your pillow. It was like he was talking right to you. He had an incredible ability to communicate with the listener while calling the game of hockey. It was a conversational style. And then his descriptions were colorful, that they were to the point. You knew where the puck was. You knew who had it. You knew who was on the ice with the guy who had it. He made sure he told you who the defense pairs were. If he saw a guy carrying the puck up the ice, he'd say, "Now here's Calgary defenseman Pekka Ratakallio." He would make sure he told you it was the other team's guy. Because a lot of people, they're listening to the game, they're hearing all these names going around, and they don't know which team's which. But he made sure that he was always identifying which team had the puck. And then, of course, he completely perfected his goal scoring routine. It was a totally different one from anybody else. No one else said, "He shoots and scores." Nobody else did that. And what was cool about his goal call, Mark, was so different, because he would say wrist shot, and then he'd say, if the puck went in, "He shoots and scores." So he really said shot twice, because he'd say it when it happens, and then he'd add that complete phrase, "He shoots and scores." And what was cool about that was that he could pause before he said "he shoots and scores." Sometimes you'd even hear the crowd already erupting, and he would pause for this effect, and you kind of knew it was coming, and then he'd let you have it, and it was so exhilarating when you'd hear the Penguins score a goal like that. Here's Lemieux, there they go. Hey, that pause was what made it so dramatic. And I just loved it. And nobody else did that. He didn't copy anybody else. He completely created his own way of calling goals.
Do teams and networks even want announcers like Mike Lange now? I tend to think they want vanilla, but it's a fine line.
Well, they don't. Producers are afraid of anybody who takes a step outside the lines. Like, the thing about made Mike so great was he dared to be different. He dared to be colorful. He dared to do things that other guys go, "Why is he doing that?" Or why is he saying that when they score? I don't like that. There's traditionalists who are offended by it. Like, there were people in our midst, the former president of the team, Ken Sawyer. He was from Canada. He didn't like Mike's goal calls. He didn't like, he beat him like a rented mule and stuff like that. He didn't like it. And there were probably a lot of people like that, traditionalists, who might have been offended by it. But what made him great was his creativity and his willingness to try different things that made people laugh or made people remember, him, in addition to remembering the moment and remembering how he brought you the moment. And that's a special quality, a special talent. It's like, Mike, you're like that. Like you think about you. You're different. You're a guy who's willing to take chances and go on the radio and be you and do cool stuff that other people wouldn't try because you might offend somebody. You wouldn't worry about that. You just did it, and you're not offensive. You're just different, and that's the way Mike was. I enjoyed that about him. I thought that's what made him great, was his willingness to try different, exciting, fun things.
Well, that's very kind of you to say, Staggy. We're talking to Paul Steigerwald here on the home of the Penguins, 105.9 The X. Talk about Mikey's preparation. His game notes were plentiful, just page upon page, taped to the wall of the broadcast booth. He worked really hard at it, didn't he?
Well, he had a special system that he came up with. He used a legal pad. A lot of guys, they have their own sheets they make up that are pre-printed, and so they just kind of fill in the blanks. What Mikey did was he would take a legal pad, he'd draw 2 lines down the middle of the page, right in the middle, so that would divide the page basically in half. And because it was 2 lines, in between those 2 lines would be the goal, the time of the goal, and then he would write on the left column, all the goals. And in the right column, he would put the penalties. And then, he would have, when the period came to an end, he'd draw a line through a horizontal line through the illegal pad at the end of the period, and he'd put the shots on goal. And then he'd go to the next period and do the same thing. But before the game even started, he had up in the top part of the legal pad, he had all the important statistics, goaltenders, some other numbers that maybe he wanted to make sure he, gave you that really were a good part of the story that night between the two teams, things like that. And then he also would write in the sayings he might use that night. So he would actually write in a couple of his goal call sayings so that when the time came to use them, they were right there in front of him. He wasn't trying to pick one out of the sky. He already had kind of prepared for it, and he made sure he wrote it down so it would be readily, accessible. So he had a system, and if you remember, he'd always be in that room the night before on the nights of the game in the media room, and he'd be sitting there, and it would basically be off to the side with his back to the room.
And that was the one time to leave him alone. You never had to leave Mikey alone except then.
Leave him alone. He's over there getting ready for the game. Everybody looked at him, and I have to tell you, I can still see him on the road in the old days, smoking a dart, flicking the ashes, and kind of thinking. He gets kind of a squinty look in his eyes when he would take a puff, and he'd be thinking, the wheels are turning in there. And he's like thinking about the game that night. He's getting ready, he's just absolutely preparing for it. He was zeroed in on what he had to do. And when he was done with that process, he grabbed the legal pad, put it in his little briefcase, and carry it upstairs and go in the booth. He didn't like when people stood to his left, because he had like this really strong peripheral vision. And if you stood to his left, he could kind of see you, and it would be a distraction. So he'd say, either stand to my right or don't be here at all, but don't stand to my left because it's a distraction to me. And I remember him telling somebody that very few first couple of days I worked with him, and that was something, was just a rule. You just didn't stand to Mikey's left or sit to Mikey's left during the game. And, in the booth, he was pretty much a stickler for, that's my booth, I don't want people coming in here. He didn't really like to he wasn't a guy who liked to put people on the air during the game. You ever notice that? There was never any guest that came into the game and sat there next to him and just talked during the course of the game. He didn't like that. He wanted to just call the game by himself and do it. And I honestly believe that he could have done TV even by himself. I don't think he needed a color analyst. I really don't. He had like a mathematical mind too. Like say there was a game where there were a lot of fights and different penalties, and one would end here and one would there, and there'd be 2 guys in the box, and you couldn't have more than a couple guys in the box, or you had to make sure you had enough guys on the ice. He would know when guys are coming out of the box. He'd know the time, and if they let him out at the wrong time, he would actually subtract from when the penalty occurred. He said, wait a minute, he's not supposed to come out yet. He should be coming out, like the timekeeper would do, except he's calling a game while he's doing it. I was always amazed at that. And then he would keep track of the stats, out-of-town scores. So, that's the thing you got to keep track of because it's, the score is progressing, and it might be important to the playoff race or whatever. He'd be giving you the scores, calling the game, giving you the stats, timing the penalties, doing the commercial stuff that he has to do, and then calling the game and making it sound unbelievable all at the same time.
I felt Mikey's biggest value might have been when the Penguins were bad, Steige, because it kept the Penguins relevant and cool and kept the fans engaged. I thought the work he did during the X Generation years before Sid got to Pittsburgh, I thought that was so valuable to keeping the old fan base and even building a new one.
I totally agree. I think what he would be good at, believe me, he and I worked a lot of bad games, or, games that were poorly played by the Penguins would be the best way to put it. But he would focus on the other team. He'd talk about how great the Islanders' power play was, or Mike Bossy, he can't really shoot the puck. He'd start to talk about players and what their traits were, and you didn't care that the Penguins didn't have Mike Bossy. You liked the fact that Mike Lange was telling you how great Mike Bossy was, and why, and then you're learning something about hockey in the process. That's what made him able to do that. He was able to make games played by those bad Penguins teams fun to listen to, and he never got too down. You could tell when the Penguins, weren't playing well and it was bothering him, but it was almost like you thought, okay, he's doing that for me because I don't like it either, but I still like hearing it. It's like I don't even know what the word is. It's like an empathetic kind of a thing and a sympathetic thing that he would bring to the table so that you all could share in the feelings that you had for the team, whether it was good or bad. And he evoked those emotions in people. I think that's what made him so unique, was that he had that power with his voice and his tone of voice to be able to evoke these emotions and kind of permeate them throughout the Western Pennsylvania on a given moment, while you're listening to a game.
I feel Mike is one of the 5 most important people in franchise history, certainly top 10. He had impact on the team in the city like some of the legendary, not just hockey announcers, Staggy, but sports announcers like Jack Buck, Foster Hewitt. You know the names. He's right up there.
Well, I put him in a category unto himself because I think he was a folk hero.
Yep.
See, there aren't a lot of those. There were broadcasters who became folk heroes. Amazingly, we've had a few of them here in Pittsburgh. Bob Prince was certainly a folk hero, and Mike Lange carried the torch for Bob Prince. He actually worked with him. Their paths crossed at the end of Bob Prince's time here in Pittsburgh. Those two actually worked together and traveled together for hockey games because Bob was doing some games on TV and Mikey was doing the radio, and they rode one time on a bus up to Cleveland to do a game against the Cleveland Crusaders, a preseason game. And Mikey loved telling the stories about Bob Prince and the things he would do when they were on the road, and he got a real kick out of him. And Bob Prince really, really gave Mikey the sort of template for what he would become in Pittsburgh. I think that when he saw how the Gunner worked the fans and worked the community and went out and touched the people, which he basically told Mikey he should do, that's when Mikey really started to really understand that he needed to get out in the community. And Mike was a product of his direct relationship with the fans. They gave him his ideas for his goal calls. He would get a chance to meet people from different neighborhoods of Pittsburgh, and that really, I think, informed his whole approach to how he called games. I'll never forget, Mark, how we used to sit in the stands doing games like we'd be in Los Angeles, and our booth was right in the crowd, and people would come up to the table and they'd go, "Hi, I'm living in L.A. now, but I'm from Braddock, and my uncle's watching. So my name's John, and could you say hi to Bob?" They'd write it down on a piece of paper. He wouldn't even blink. He'd grab the piece of paper, he'd set it down in front of him. And before the end of the night, there he was. Joe's out here from Braddock. He wants to say hi to Mary, Pat, and Joe, and they name all the names, And it was just unreal. And there's another, that's another thing I'm talking about. He's calling a hockey game. He's got all these responsibilities, but he had a way of weaving that stuff into his broadcast. And if you don't think that makes an impact, that guy tells his relatives that, that Mike Lange mentioned him on the air. The next thing you know, 10 people in the neighborhood know that Mike Lange talked about so-and-so last night on TV. and it spreads like wildfire. And that's how you become a folk hero. And he knew that, and he worked it magically.
No question. I didn't know till now that Bob Prince gave him that advice, but Mike passed that advice on to me, Staggy, and it certainly did me a lot of good. Staggy, great stuff. Thank you for coming on and sharing the memories, and I'll see you at the game Saturday.
Thanks, Mark. It's a tough day for all of us, and talking about it really kind of after several hours of it, I feel pretty bad right now, I can tell you that.
Yeah, but it's cathartic, Staggy. I feel good for just all the great work we did, and you certainly did with Mike Lange. That's Paul Steigerwald. I'm Mark Madden. We got John Buccigross at the top of the hour, 105.9.